Right, in this video, we are going to be taking notes for section 8.3, tests for parallelograms. Over here in that top right corner, go ahead and fill in today's date. All right, in our boxes here, we've got a picture of a parallelogram over here, and the rule is if both pairs of opposite sides of a quadrilateral are congruent, oops, it's not a very good congruent side, then it is a parallelogram. So that's one rule. So notice the tick marks marking that. Over here, I've got one pair of sides marked congruent. And then over here, I've got my top two lines marked congruent. Again, with those tick marks. Remember, those tick marks tell us that things are congruent. Second way to test for a parallelogram is if one pair of opposite sides of a quadrilateral are both congruent and parallel. That's the sign for parallel. I'll write congruent in here in case you didn't know that. Then it is a parallelogram. Okay, so we're looking over here at the picture. We've got one pair of opposite sides. These tick marks right here show us that they're congruent. Remember, these little arrows that are drawn in here show us that those two lines are parallel. So they have to be both congruent and parallel in order to prove that that's a parallelogram. The last way to prove you have a parallelogram is to look at the diagonals. And the rule is if the diagonals of a quadrilateral bisect each other, remember, bisect means to cut them in half, then it is a parallelogram. So again, going over to my picture, notice my diagonals come from those opposite vertices. I've got one diagonal here of KE, and then those tick marks showing that that's bisected. Remember, bisect means to cut it into two equal halves. My other diagonal comes from the opposite vertices of DK. And again, those tick marks are showing me that it's cut in half. All right, so to summarize it, we have 4 different ways we can show that we have a parallelogram. So a quadrilateral is a parallelogram if both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. I'll give you the symbol for that too. Both pair of opposite sides are parallel. That's the symbol for that. And then this next one, remember, it's one pair of opposite sides is both congruent and parallel, or if the diagonals bisect each other. Those are the 4 different ways we can tell if a quadrilateral is a parallelogram. All right, now we've got 4 examples down here. Oh, sorry. Let's go to the next slide. There we go. Make these a little bigger. All right, so we're going to look at our quadrilaterals and determine if it's a parallelogram. So remember, we've got those 4 different ways to prove we have a parallelogram. We're looking for opposite sides of, or both pairs of opposite sides congruent, both pairs of opposite sides parallel, one pair both parallel and congruent, and or the diagonals can bisect each other. So looking here at this first one, I see some tick marks for some congruent. So I've got one pair of opposite sides, and then I've got an opposite pair of sides that are parallel. So in this case, It's not necessarily a parallelogram. We don't have enough information yet to see if that's a parallelogram. Okay. Looking here at, oops, I don't want that. Looking here at number 2. I notice I've got some measurements here, so I've got one pair of opposite sides equal to 30. So those are congruent. I'll go ahead and give those opposite sides a little tick mark. And then I see this other opposite side is 15, which means that those are congruent. So right now I've got opposite pairs of sides that are both congruent. So yes, I have a parallelogram because both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. So I can show that I have a parallelogram. That's one of those rules that we just went over. All right, now I'm going to look at number 3 here. Noticing I've got some diagonals drawn in, so the rules if I'm looking at diagonals is that they have to both bisect each other. So if I'm looking at this diagonal right here, I notice that I've got one length equal to 8 and one length equal to 9. So right away I can say that those 8 is not equal to 9. So those diagonals don't bisect each other, because remember bisect means to cut it in half. So I'm going to say not a parallelogram. All right, and then moving on to my last example here, I'm looking at the 10 centimeters here, so I know my opposite sides are equal to each other. And I also see that they have these triangles here, which means that they're parallel. So right now I can say that yes, this is a parallelogram, and because it's got one pair of sides that is congruent and parallel. All right, let's fix that parallel here. Not sure why my pen's not letting me write. Oh, of course. All right, parallel. If I wanted to use the symbol for parallel, we've got congruent, congruent and parallel. So that's a yes right there. All right, and that's the notes for section 8.3. Down here on the bottom, you guys have that assignment. It is a worksheet. Worksheet 8.3, again, it's right after the note section.